Welcome back to TrainSignal's VMware vSphere 5 training. You're watching Understanding and Using Tasks, Events, and Alarms lesson. Alright, so we have this great infrastructure, this great vSphere infrastructure that we've built. Now, what good is an infrastructure if you can't properly monitor it and properly be able to look around and see what's going on, how to troubleshoot? The first step in troubleshooting is understanding where you can gather the information within any infrastructure in general. So in this lesson, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the tools that you have as part of your vSphere or part of your virtual center that allows you to get more insight into what's going on. We're going to talk a little bit about tasks and events. What's the difference between a task and an event? And when do you look at each? We're going to talk about how you configure SNMP, SMTP, and email in Virtual Center in general so that you can get alerted when certain thresholds are met or broken within your infrastructure. We're going to talk about how you get alerted using alarms within Virtual Center. So we want to make sure we're able to create alarms or use the default alarms that are there that can be triggered based on certain thresholds. If the CPU goes to 90% or if the memory goes to 90%, etc., etc. We want to be alerted so that we can be proactive in administering and managing the environment and avoiding an issue if we can, and we can. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So understanding tasks and events. At any level of the inventory within your vSphere or your virtual center, there is always tasks and events. They exist at almost any level. And the difference between tasks and events is a task is exactly what it says. Anytime something happens, whether you're initiating that task or whether the system is initiating that task, like a vMotion, for example, or you put something in maintenance mode, anytime there's any kind of a task happening, that gets registered under the tasks node within that object, and you're able to view it. So for example, if you're doing a storage vMotion, or you're doing a copy or a clone or a regular vMotion, and let's say you're doing a lot of them and you want to know what's going on or what's the percentage of completion of these tasks, you can go to that object, go to the tasks tab, and you're able to see all the tasks that are currently running or that have completed. Events, on the other hand, will show you everything that has occurred on the server. If the server lost its node or lost network connectivity, if it was rebooted, if it's gone into maintenance mode, the results of the tasks, any errors, any warnings, any informational, all of that stuff gets registered in the events. The events with vSphere is very similar to what you have in the events with Windows. It is a registry for all the different things that have occurred, whether successful or not, in your environment based on that particular objects. Now, because you get a large number of events and tasks for that matter within any objects in the inventory, it doesn't really matter. There's a cool feature that allows you to filter these events. So if you're looking for a particular keyword within the events, I'll show you how to do that. You can go and just put in that particular keyword or anything that you can filter against. You can use it in tasks and events to just narrow the amount of things that you're looking at and just be able to get exactly what you need. Now, the other cool thing is that you can export the events. I don't know if it's cool or not, but you can export these events into a file format that you can read outside of the vSphere. Sometimes you need to export these events if you're dealing with VMware support. They'll ask for them. It's just an easy way for you to export them. Sometimes you just want to be able to export them because you want to aggregate them maybe on an event server that you have in the environment that allows you to see all the events for the different environments, whether it's ESX or something else. Now, I'm also going to show you the events home within the Virtual Center server. It's actually pretty cool because it centralizes where you can go to look at things. And we're going to talk about scheduled tasks. Now, scheduled tasks, it's the same as with the Windows scheduled tasks, just to give you something to relate to. Anything you want to automate, anything you want to set on a schedule, maybe you want to put the server in maintenance mode and reboot it, but you don't want to do that during normal business hours, of course. You want to do it for whatever reason at 8 o'clock at night. You can certainly schedule that. Update Manager downloads are also scheduled. So anything that you can think of, you can schedule, and there's a ton of scheduled default scheduled tests that are available, and you can also create your own if you wanted to. Now, SNMP and SMTP email in Virtual Center. Now, best practice always dictates that, especially if you have some kind of an enterprise monitoring system, that you tie your vSphere infrastructure with that monitoring system via SNMP traps. So SNMP traps are a very good way for you to understand and know, again, what's happening within the environment. Now, with regards to SNMP and SMTP, the same way SNMP is triggered by an alarm, SMTP is also triggered by an alarm. I'm going to show you where you can go to configure that. Anytime there's an alarm that gets triggered, a threshold that's been breached or met, obviously the SNMP trap is going to capture that, but also you can have the SMTP send an email, send a text message, whatever the case might be, alerting you that, hey, something's up here. It's also worth noting in vSphere that vCenter is the entity that does the sending of the SMTP and the SNMP traps, not ESXi server. So I just wanted to throw that out there for you guys to understand. And from an SMTP configuration perspective, it's very simple to configure within Virtual Center. We're going to go through that as well, but I just wanted to make a note of it. Now again, alarms alert you to take proactive measures, right? So, if you set certain thresholds within the environment, so that if your CPU is at 50% or your memory is at 70%, you want to know ahead of time, because you want to be able to get in and take a look and see what's causing this and try to avoid an issue before it happens. So alarms are very useful for proactively managing the environment. You could obviously receive SNMP traps. You can send an SMTP email if you wanted to. You can start and stop a virtual machine. This is an excerpt of the options that you can take against a virtual machine or against a particular alarm when it is breached. So this is just a summary. When we get into Virtual Center, I'm going to show you a whole list of other things that you can do. You can execute a script. So for example, if a particular service has stopped, for example, and it notices that the service has stopped, you can execute a script immediately that goes through and does some maintenance task and maybe tries to restart those services. So there's a lot more that you can do, but this is just a quick snapshot of what you have here. Now, the other thing to note is you can also configure alarms based on thin provisioning, and that's pretty cool, because if you're doing thin provisioning from within VMware, which by the way I don't recommend, if your storage array supports thin provisioning, offload that to your storage administrator, have the array deal with thin provisioning. But if you are doing thin provisioning at the VMware level, then it is very, very important to set alarms so that you make sure you never run out of physical space on your vCenter or your vSphere environment in general. So thin provisioning alarms are very, very helpful. You can also set alarms for the vNetwork distributed switch as well. All right, with that, enough presentation. Let's go ahead and jump into Virtual Center and see what we've got in there from an alarms and events and tasks perspective. All right, so we're back on our Virtual Center server here. And I'm starting you off at the home page. Let's start off by talking about things that are obvious. And let's start off by talking about the events home page here. So if you click on events, it's going to aggregate everything for you. Just a quick and easy way of taking a look at events. Now, if we go back to home, you'll also see that we have the scheduled tasks here, which we're going to talk about in a second, that also give you a quick shortcuts to things. But before we get into the details of all of that, let's go ahead and start with the hosts and clusters. And you'll see that at every node of your inventory, you have a tasks and events and also alarms node for that matter. So right now, I'm at the data center level. If I go to the cluster level, again, you'll see tasks and events, alarms. If we go down to the host level, you'll see the same thing as well, etc., etc. If you go all the way up, then you still have that as well. So again, at every level of the inventory, you have tasks, events, and alarms. So let's take it down to the data center level here, and let's start off by talking about tasks and events. So as soon as you click on Tasks and Events tab, you'll see that you have two subcomponents here. If you click on Tasks, it's going to basically tell you all the tasks that are currently running or the tasks that have been completed. So for example, I deleted a folder called staging. It was completed successfully. I have a green check mark, etc., etc. So those are all the tasks that have been done or have been executed against this particular data center, and you can go as far back as it can take you. So power on, power off, resets of virtual machines, etc., etc. Events Events will show you informational, so every time you see an I here, it's an informational log that's going on. If you click on it, you'll get more information about what this informational log is. And you can scroll, for example, here we have a warning. So you can, again, get more information about that particular warning, but I also want to show you a really cool thing. So you'll see that on the right here, you have Ask VMware. If the warning that you're getting is connected to a particular knowledge base article and you click on Ask VMware, it will launch a web browser and it will take you to that particular knowledge base article. Now, for whatever reason, I don't have internet connectivity, so let me go ahead and close that and try it again. And there you go. That must have been just some kind of a fluke. So it'll take you to that knowledge base article that tells you, okay, well, if you're getting this warning within the environment, these are some of the causes, and this is a solution that you might take a look at to resolve this particular issue. So again, very, very helpful. I actually love this feature because it makes it easy for me to find that knowledge base article. I don't have to Google anything to find it. Now, the other thing that I wanted to draw your attention to, again, this is an error. Again, you'll see that you have the Ask VMware. Now, the other cool thing, and if we can find an error that that will let me do that, is sometimes it'll allow you to upload or submit the error to VMware. So if it doesn't, if it changes from Ask VMware to Submit Error Report to VMware, that means, okay, there is no knowledge base article that's tied to it at this time. Please submit this error to VMware, and you can go through the process of doing that. It'll give you all the information that you need here to submit this particular error to VMware, which again enhances the knowledge base, and we help each other, so to speak. So these are very, very helpful tools that you should be aware of. Now, remember when we were talking in the presentation, I told you about, well, you get a ton of events, right? Now you can't go through all of them. You can filter. So you can do, I don't know, maybe reboot. If you use that, then it will give you anything that has reboot in it, or let's say error. Let's type in error again here. And it will list all of the errors for you. That way, you don't have to go scroll down for all the errors that have happened in the event, in the events here. Or you can do warning. If I could type, it'd be nice. And so on and so forth. So that's from an events and warnings perspective. Now, if you wanted to export your events, you can most certainly do so. You can always come up to File, Export, and you can export your events. So, again, this is just an easy way of gathering the information that you need from a support perspective. And while we're at it, you can also export the list of all the VMs that are in this data center. You can also export the system log. So again, if you are trying to troubleshoot or you're working with VMware, this will be your friend as far as how to export the necessary information that they need to troubleshoot. So let's go into alarms now. Now, alarms are pretty cool. Here you'll see that you have two tabs. You have triggered alarms and you have definitions. Let's start with definitions because this just lists all the alarms that you have available to you. These are just default alarms that are created that you can use or not. You can always right-click on a particular alarm, view its settings if you wanted to. These alarms are, for the most part, alarms that VMware has created. So you'll see that you can log into this particular alarm. You can go to the triggers and see what needs to happen for this alarm to get triggered or to get triggered. So here you'll see it's the virtual machine memory usage percent is above 85, then I want you to trigger. And if it's above 45 for 10 minutes, I want you to do an alert. And an error if it's up to if it goes up to 95% and stays there for 10 minutes. So what you have here, if it goes up, if the CPU utilization goes up to 85% and it stays there for 10 minutes, then I want you to trigger a warning. If it goes up to 95% and stays there for 10 minutes, then I want you to trigger an error or an alert. So these are the things the criteria. Now after that, you can go to reporting and you can configure it on how to report. But the interesting thing is the actions pane here. So you can come in here and tell it, okay, what do you want it to do if it hits its warning, and what do you want it to do when it goes from green to warning, from warning to alert, from alert to warning, back and forth. So you have methods of configuring that, and we're going to talk about that in just a second, but I just wanted to show you here what it looks like from the default alarms perspective. Now, if you wanted to create your own alarm, you can right-click anywhere, click on New Alarm, and you can come in, let's say, we're going to call this one Eli's Alarm. What are you trying to monitor? Is it virtual machines? Is it hosts? Is it clusters, data centers? What are you trying to monitor? Very simple. Now you can also further filter it. What do you want to monitor it for? You want to monitor it for specific conditions like the state of the CPU, the memory, etc. Or do you want to monitor it for events? If a particular event log is recorded, if a particular error is recorded, then you can monitor that for this particular thing. Now you can enable or disable it. Sometimes you might want to create an alarm but not make it available yet, so you can disable that. If you go into triggers, here you're going to configure what kind of triggers are you configuring, right? So we click on add, and as soon as you click on add, this is by default what shows up, but from the drop down menu here, if you highlight it, you get a bunch of options that you can configure. So for example, if you want to configure let's see, disk usage, you can select that. Well, after you select what kind of trigger you want to use, now we want to select the condition. Now with the condition as well, you can use is above, or you can is below. So how are you trying to configure this particular alarm? Sometimes you want it above a particular value. Sometimes you want to know if it's below a particular value. So you want to make sure maybe it's below 10% utilization or 10% free disk space on the disk, right? So in my case, let's say we want to do is below, and in here, let's say 10%, for example, for 5 minutes, even though, from a disk usage perspective, this probably won't matter that much, but you still need to put this condition in. So let's say for 5 minutes, it's below 10%. So I want you to trigger a warning. Now, if it goes, let's say 5, then I want you, and for 5 minutes, then I want you to trigger an alert right away. Now down here, you'll notice that how do you want the trigger to go? You want the trigger to get initiated as soon as one of the conditions is met, or do you want it to wait until all of the conditions are met before you trigger the alarm? Again, it just depends on how you're configuring it and what the particular setting is. Now, if we go on to reporting, the reporting deals with the frequency of how many times do you want it to repeat this alarm. So down here, it's very simple. The frequency is very, very easy. So, you want it to repeat, I don't know, every 10 minutes until someone acknowledges or takes action against it. Up here, it's a percentage above or below the limit. So you can say, if it's 10% above the limit or 10% below the limit, I want you to resend that. It's just a range at this point. From an actions perspective, here's where we configure, well, what do you want to do when it goes from green to warning? So let's say I add an action here that I want you to send a notification email right away, for example, once it goes from green to warning. Then what I want you to do is send a notification email, or let's actually change that to, for example, send a notification trap, and this is for giggles, it might be the other way around. Once when it goes from warning to alert. Actually, let's change that to more than once. You want it to repeat when it's going from warning to alert. Now, the final thing is, I want you to run a command, for example, when it goes from, I want you to do that once when it goes from alert to warning, which means I've taken care of it, but there's maintenance tasks in there that I want to take care of. So when it's starting to go back down, when it's dropping, maybe I want you to send a some kind of a command that just to make sure that the services are up, etc., etc. So any kind of maintenance task that you can think of. Now, finally, I don't want to keep going through this whole list, but I do want to show you what you have here. You can also select power on a VM, power off a VM, suspend, etc. So you have a bunch of actions that you can take against a particular trigger when it goes into effect, right? And then you can configure, the frequency of how often do you want it to repeat this particular action. How often do you want it to send a notification? How often do you want it to run this command, etc., etc. So this is how you can create an alarm within vCenter for any particular object that you have. Now let's go back to triggered alarms here. Now triggered alarms are the alarms that have gone off. Now when an alarm goes off, if you have a lot of administrators in the environment, until someone acknowledges this alarm that says, hey, I got it, I know this alarm is going, I'm working on this issue, this alarm is going to continue to follow all of the rules and settings that you've configured when you configured the alarm. So if you set it to say, go from warning to alert, and I want you to keep doing that every 10 minutes, send me an email every 10 minutes, then this will continue to send you an email every 10 minutes until someone comes in here, right clicks on it and said, acknowledge. I got it, I'm working on it, don't worry about it, I have it. Now you'll notice that when you acknowledge it, it'll give you the acknowledged date, time, etc. And it'll also tell you who acknowledged it. So if you have more than one administrator in the environment, you can come in and say, okay, well, Frank is working on this. You can contact Frank if you need to ask about or get an update on this. Now you'll see that here I'm having some kind of a heating issue with regards to my host, because both of them are reporting a high temperature on the host. So maybe my cooling isn't working properly in the environment, maybe the AC is down. So again, I'm going to acknowledge this to tell everyone, hey, I'm working on it. Now once you've resolved this, if you want to remove this trigger, because until you've resolved it and removed these triggers, you'll notice that you have these warning signs by your ESX hosts. So when you're done, you're going to come in here and say, clear, we're done. I fixed it, it's fine, it's working, thank you very much. Remove these alarms so that next time when someone logs in, this does not catch their attention. So again, an easier way of dealing with things. Well, that's as far as alarms is concerned. Now let's go back to home here and let's go into, again, events. Again, it will show you all of the events that are happening. You can filter. Now, if for whatever reason you're not seeing this filter box here, I just want to make sure I tell you how to enable it. You can click on View, come down here to where it says Filtering, click it, it should show a checkbox next to it, and it will enable all the filtering features for you. Now, if we go into Schedule Tasks, by default, when you install Update Manager, it's going to create a task for Update Manager to periodically check for updates from VMware. If you wanted to create your own task, you can right click anywhere, click on New Scheduled Tasks, and you have a bunch of scheduled tasks that are available to you here that you can select from. Add a host, for example, you can click on OK, and you can go through the process of adding a host based on a specific time or what the case might be. So let's say I want to add a host in Hilton Head. Click on Next, you add the host information, you add the username and password, you click on Next, and based on the time and day that you've specified, this particular task is going to kick in and is going to work. Now the other thing that I wanted to show you here with regards to alarms is, let's say that you wanted to disable an alarm at a particular object in the inventory. Let's say you wanted to disable alarms for ESX1 for whatever reason. Maybe you've taken it out of, put it in maintenance, whatever the case is. You can right click on it down here, drag down to where it says alarm. You can add alarm, so that's an easy way of just adding alarm, or you can disable all alarm actions that way. So any alarms that are happening on ESX01 here will get disabled. You can do the same thing at any level of the inventory. So if you go up to the data center and do the same thing, then what happens is obviously data center wide, you're going to disable these alarms. So again, just something for you to be aware of. All right, now let's take a look, and I've shown you this before in an earlier lesson, but let's take a look at where you can go to configure SNMP and SMTP for that matter. So if you click on, well, you can come down here to Home, and you can most certainly go into the vCenter server settings, or you can get to it from the administration file menu here. I like to get to it from the shortcut, but if you click on it, you'll see that you have options for SNMP. So you can come in here and configure SNMP based on the environment, configure your traps, etc., etc. Once you're done, you can also configure mail. Now, it's important to note that with mail, all you can do is really configure the SMTP server and also the sender account here. So, just give you a heads up on what you can and cannot configure for that perspective. Once you have SMTP and the sender account configured, then you can obviously configure your alarms so that one of the actions is send an email out. Let's go ahead and click on cancel. And the last thing I want to show you here is vCenter server status or service status. It's cool because you can click on it and it'll give you a list of all the services in vCenter that are currently running. If anything is stopped, if anything maybe has a warning, whatever the case is, that allows you to also address that particular issue right away. So a very handy view here that you can take a look at. All right, let's go back to home. And that's all there is to it from an alarms, tasks, and events perspective. Short lesson. Let's go ahead and flip back to our presentation now and recap what we've learned. So we started off this lesson by talking about understanding tasks and events. I talked about the fact that tasks happen to log every task that is going on in the environment today. You powered on a VM, you powered off a VM, a vMotion is taking place. It'll show you the status bar of vMotion, storage vMotion, cloning, copy. All of these are tasks that are happening, and if you wanted a way to look at what's going on in your environment, you go to the tasks view and it will list them all for you. The events view, on the other hand, is a repository of informational, warning, and alerts, errors maybe, logs that have happened, whether they're a result of tasks or not. It also logs all of the tasks events, successful tasks, error tasks, failed tasks, so on and so forth. So events are a very centralized place where you can go to take a look at your warnings and alarms and so on, and a good place to start when you have troubleshooting or you have issues. I also showed you how certain warning and certain errors or alerts, you can either click on a link that Ask VMware will take you to a knowledge base article, or how you can submit an error to VMware if it doesn't allow you or if it doesn't have a solution for the particular problem. So again, tasks and events, very useful. We also moved on talking about configuring SNMTP and SMTP email in vCenter. I showed you where you can go in the VMware vCenter server settings to configure your SNMP traps, etc., etc. And we also talked about SMTP and how you can configure the server and the sender email. We then moved on to talking about alerts through alarms, how there's you can configure alarms, you can use the default alarms, or you can configure your own alarms, how you can set thresholds and triggers, and the actions that it would take when an alarm is when the alarm threshold is breached. CPU hits 90%, I want you to send an email. If a virtual machine experiences some kind of a network outage, I want you to power it off or power it on. I want you to run a script, etc., etc. So these are all actions against alarms that have happened in the environment. We talked about how you can acknowledge that an alarm has happened so that other members of your team know that you're working on it. With that, I hope this lesson was informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.